Hello, and welcome to this video on phonological levels. When morphemes or words come together, often the sounds change. How do you write a word or morpheme when its sounds change like that?
First, let's review a little about what a morpheme is. A morpheme is a part of a word that has meaning. A morpheme can be a root, like pack, a prefix attached to the beginning of a root, like unpack, a suffix attached to the end of a root, like packing. There are other kinds of morphemes too, but this is enough to start. Now let's talk about changes in morphemes and words. When we say the sounds change, we are talking about a regular change that depends on where the word or morpheme is. What is next to it? For example, in English we have cats and dogs. The plural is pronounced S in cats, but Z in dogs. We have inadequate, but impossible and irrelevant. The prefix meaning not changes depending on what it's next to.
What's the first decision to make when there are changes like these?
One principle to start with: if a sound doesn't contrast with other sounds, don't write a separate letter for it. See video 9 on representing consonants and vowels. Here's another example from Koni in Ghana. The word for beans is pronounced shime with the sound esh. The only place esh occurs is before vowels like e, but s occurs before other vowels. So we have shime, but sara and sunti. There is no contrast between s and esh. No words differ only by those. So we write it with s. We will come back to this later.
That helps when sounds do not contrast. What do you do if one contrastive sound changes to another one?
If you put a morpheme next to another one, and a sound changes from one contrastive sound to another contrastive sound, then you need to ask more questions. And here, the idea of phonological levels is helpful. Think of steps on a ladder. What is in people's heads, even if they are not aware of it, is called the underlying level. What you actually say is called the surface level. Sometimes these are the same, and sometimes they are different.
I sometimes hear the term form and sometimes level. What's the difference between these?
A form is a particular word or morpheme, like in or pack. Think of a level as a location where the forms are. So an underlying level has underlying forms like impossible and sime. Likewise, the surface level has surface forms like impossible and shime. For English, we have the prefix in as an underlying form, and it is pronounced in words like inadequate. So the underlying and surface forms are the same here. But think of impossible. Here the underlying form is still in, but the surface form is now im with an M sound. Likewise, for the Koni word shime, we have an underlying form sime and a surface form shime. You can write a rule to change the underlying form to the surface form. Here, we won't talk about the details of how to write these rules. You can get some phonology training for that.
Okay, it's helpful to think about an underlying form, what's in our heads, and a surface form, how we actually say it. So, which one do we write in our orthography?
Let's think about the advantages and disadvantages for each choice. If we write the underlying form, an advantage is that we keep the same appearance all the time. This is sometimes called constant word image. The reader can recognize it quickly. However, a disadvantage is that sometimes the underlying form is not how people actually say it, or think they say it. If we write the surface form, then an advantage is that this is how people do say it. One disadvantage is that it changes the look of the word or morpheme, so people don't identify it as quickly. Also, people are not always even aware that they are saying it like that.
Well, all of these sound important. How do we decide?
Let's add another idea that will help. We add one more level between the underlying level and the surface level. We call this the lexical level. Let's see how this works. We will see that the lexical level is what people are actually aware of. Here's how the underlying, lexical, and surface levels relate to each other. With the morpheme in, people are aware that it's pronounced impossible. Impossible is at the lexical level, and we have a lexical rule to get from underlying level to lexical level. And for this, there's no change from lexical level to surface level. For shime, it works differently. We start with shime in the underlying level, and there's no lexical rule, so there's no change at the lexical level. But there is a post-lexical rule, and that gives the surface level. For orthography, we aim at the lexical level. So we would write impossible with M and shime with S.
How do we know which kind of rule is there and which level we're at?
I'll give some tests in a minute, but we have already said the first one. That is, speakers are aware of the lexical level after a lexical rule applies. An untrained speaker is not usually aware of the results of a post-lexical rule. Here's another example. Remember cats and dogs? We say an S sound for cats and a Z sound for dogs. But untrained English speakers are not aware of that. So the rule that changes S to Z is a post-lexical rule. Even though S and Z contrast in English, for this case, we write them both as S.
Well, this sounds pretty easy. But are there complications?
The lexical level is a good starting place for decisions. It is still a good idea to check your decisions through testing and make any changes you need to. Also, not all decisions are as simple as our examples here. So there are other tests to help you decide what is a lexical rule and what is a post-lexical rule.
Okay, tell us about those other tests.
We've talked about two of these already. First, does the rule produce a sound that is not contrastive in the language, like esh in koni? If so, it's post-lexical. Don't write that sound. Second, are speakers aware of the result of that rule? Aware of that sound? Like people don't know the difference in the plural of cats and dogs. If they are not aware of it, it's post-lexical. Don't write that difference. But if they are aware of it, it's probably lexical. Third, does the rule apply across word boundaries, not just inside words? If so, it's post-lexical. Don't write that difference.
That tells us about post-lexical rules. How about tests for lexical rules?
First, does the rule require a particular morpheme boundary when morphemes join into a word? If so, it's lexical. Write the result of that rule. Second, does the rule happen only with some words and not others, even if they are phonologically and grammatically similar? If so, it's lexical. Write the result of that rule. Third, does the rule lack a phonetic cause? If so, it's lexical. Write the result of that rule. A comment here. Both lexical and post-lexical rules may have phonetic causes, but when there is no phonetic cause, you can label a rule as lexical.
Do all these tests really work?
Most of the time they do, but not always. Sometimes there are complications. You can get different answers when you ask older people and younger people, for example. Sometimes it gets more complicated, and the answer is not always clear. But aiming for the lexical level gives a good starting place, and it's always good to test your decisions with different people. See the video on testing the orthography.
Can we see one more example of how we can apply these tests?
In Chumburung from Ghana, Kofi is someone's name. Kungu means head. But when you say Kofi's head, it comes out Kofu Kungu. The E changes to U. Is this a lexical rule or a post-lexical rule? E and U are both contrastive, so that test doesn't help. But this definitely applies across word boundaries. So that means it is definitely post-lexical, and we will not write the result of that rule. We write Kofi Kungu, not Kofu Kungu. A final piece of advice. Sometimes the tests don't give you a clear answer. Usually there are more post-lexical rules than lexical ones. So if you're not sure whether a rule is lexical or post-lexical, assume it's post-lexical and don't write the result.
We see that when sounds of a morpheme change in different words, the idea of phonological levels can help. There are questions you can ask and principles you can apply to give an answer to the question, how do I write this word?